Philip the Handsome no more wanted to go to Spain than he wanted to go to hell, the Spanish ambassador reported to Ferdinand and Isabella, who had issued the invitation. Much as they disliked the fact that when Juana became queen, her Habsburg husband would be king, they had invited the young couple to Spain to let Philip become familiar with its laws and customs. After much urging, and after their third child had been born, the Habsburg playboy finally agreed to make this visit. But it was many months later before Philip could tear himself away from his gay companions and his latest lady love. Then he insisted on going by way of France, where he was highly entertained by Louis XII, standing enemy of his father-in-law. And despite Juana's objection, he arranged a marriage between their 2-year-old son Charles and the French Princess Claude, who was then 3. Ferdinand and Isabella were to meet Philip for the first time at a family dinner in Toledo. Juana had hoped that, in spite of his friendship with the French king, her parents would see how truly wonderful Philip was. She hoped Philip would not show how much he hated Spanish food. He was wearing gold and purple velvet and brocaded satin, which she thought was most becoming. Then she worried that her parents might think that he was overdressed. They were in plain dark wool. Ferdinand and Isabella were seated in stiff high-backed chairs at a huge carved table lighted with tall ornate candelabra. Her father, Juana noticed, had lost a front tooth and was beginning to look old. But her mother, although she had been quite ill, had lost none of that quiet strength that made one feel so inadequate in her presence. Juana had to translate all that was said from Spanish into French, and French into Spanish. What her parents were thinking, she could only guess. Philip, she knew, was bored. During the next months, Philip grew more and more bored. By fall, he announced that he was going home. Juana was then expecting her 4th baby and could not travel. When she found that he was going without her, she went to pieces, sobbing and weeping, but to no effect. Philip left, and had such a high time on his way home that it took him almost a year to get there. First he returned to France for more gaiety. Then he went on to the Duchy of Savoy to visit his sister Margaret, whom he had sent off in the winter of 1501 to marry a third husband, the Duke of Savoy. The Duke was a brother of her old friend Louise. In March 1503, Juana's baby was born, a boy who was named Ferdinand for his father. After that, knowing that she could travel, her spirits revived. When at last she heard from Philip telling her to come home, she was almost beside herself with joy. She made plans to leave at once and ordered mules for the journey. But she could not go over land because her father was again at war with France. Juana was then living in an old castle near Medina del Campo. Isabella, who was very ill at the time, in Segovia, 50 miles away, sent a bishop to prevent the impatient girl from starting out on her mules. The bishop reached the castle just in time, at the very moment when Juana was crossing the courtyard toward the outer gate. As the bishop could not stop her with words, he ordered the gate closed and locked, and the drawbridge raised. Seeing that she was trapped, Juana became like a wild animal. She screamed, she begged, pleaded, pounded on the gate until she was exhausted. All day she stood by the gate, and all through the icy winter night. Not until the next afternoon would she enter the small guardhouse and sit by a fire. Then, since no one could do anything more with her, they sent for her mother. Isabella was far too ill to attempt the 50 miles on horseback, but believed she could endure being carried in a litter and forced herself to make the journey in just 2 days. she found Juana still huddled in the guardroom, disheveled and wild-eyed. As the frantic girl looked up to see her mother standing there, quiet as a rock, the words she hurled at her in desperation were words so shameful, so far from what a daughter should say to her mother, Isabella said later, that had I not seen her mental condition, I would never have stood them. Bishops and doctors advised the queen that Juana must not be held against her will any longer, and a fleet of ships was assembled to send her to the Netherlands. She went in March 1504. Little Ferdinand, then a year old, the apple of his grandfather's eye, was left behind. Unlike his brother Charles, he was to be brought up as a Spaniard in his mother's country. Reunion with her idolized Philip brought no peace to Juana's sad, foolish heart. One day she came upon a beautiful blonde reading what she was sure must be a love letter from him. Juana demanded to see it. The young lady tore it to bits and swallowed the pieces. Juana snatched up a pair of scissors, grabbed the girl's long yellow hair, yanked it down, cut it off to the scalp, and sent her rival bleeding and screaming from the scene. The incident became an international scandal, one more agony for Isabella to endure, which would further sap what little strength the tired queen and mother had left.